Hello Planeswalkers, Andrew here with another deck tech. Today we'll be looking at Syr Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale. Now this deck tech will be going over my personal build of the deck, the version that I own in paper, which means it fits within my budget and isn't by any means the optimal build of the deck. That said, it's one of just a few decks that I built with little to no aid from EDHREC or similar online sources that suggest cards for decks. As we'll get into in a moment, Syr Gwyn focuses on knights and equipment. However, I found that many knights I was putting into the deck were legendary, and there are several legendary equipment cards, so I altered the build partway through to include more legendary knights and equipment, shifting the focus slightly to fit in cards that care about legendary spells. With that out of the way, let's look at what Gwyn does. She's a 5/5 human knight for 3 and the full Mardu, and has Vigilance and Menace. Whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you draw a card and lose 1 life. And she makes all equipment equipped to knights for free. As stated previously, these abilities can lean heavily into both equipment and knights. So let's first talk about which knights we'll be running, and get into the equipment right after. Adriana, captain of the guard, has melee, which gives her +1/+1 for the turn for each opponent you've attacked this combat, but only when she attacks. Make sure you read the reminder text carefully, because she also gives all of your other creatures melee. Arvad the Cursed was the card that inspired me to add in more legendary spells, with his ability to boost other legendary creatures you control, as well as bringing Death Touch and Lifelink for himself. Tyler actually has an Orzhov deck that's led by Arvad, that focuses exclusively on legendary spells. It's a pretty cool deck, and he'll likely do a deck tech on it in the future. Ariel, Knight of Windgrace, has Vigilance, and can either be paid into and tapped to create a 2/2 Knight token with Vigilance, or paid into, tapped, and have you tap X untapped Knights you control to destroy a creature with power X or less. Balin, Wandering Knight, packs First Strike, and has Double Strike as long as he has at least 2 equipment on him. You can pay into him to attach all equipment to him, which is useful both when we don't have Gwyn on board, and useful for equipping him at instant speed. Corpse Knight makes each opponent lose a life whenever a creature enters under your control. Danitha Capuchin, Paragon, has First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink, and makes aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less, and Elenda, the Dusk Rose, has Lifelink, gets a +1/+1 counter whenever another creature dies, and when she dies, you make X 1/1 white vampire tokens with Lifelink, where X is her power. Inspiring Veteran gives other knights you control +1/+1. Josu Ves, Lich Knight, is Liliana's undead brother, who bears a stunning resemblance to DC's Steppenwolf from their horrible Justice League movie. He has Kicker for 5 and a black, and has Menace, and when he enters after being kicked, you create 8 2/2 Zombie Knight tokens with Menace. Spicy. Knight of the Ebon Legion can boost himself by +3/+3 for 2 and a black, and at your end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, he gets a +1/+1 counter. Also, he has just a few wisps of hair, which I didn't notice until long after this card was printed. Quend, Pride of Femerith, has Double Strike, and gives creatures you control that have First Strike, Double Strike. Lena, Selfless Champion, creates a 1/1 soldier token when she enters for each non-token creature you control, and you can sack her to give all your other creatures with power less than hers indestructible for the turn. Martin Stromgald gives other attacking creatures +1/+1 for the turn for each attacking creature besides himself whenever he attacks, and he does the same for blocking. Silverwing Squadron has Flying and Vigilance, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control, and when it attacks, you make a 2/2 Knight token with Vigilance for each opponent. Sir Alan, the Lion's Claw, has First Strike, and when he attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 for the turn. Circadian is my favorite card in the deck, and it's fair if you don't want to run him because he's a silver bordered card. I get it, but if your play group's okay with him, he can be great fun. He essentially gives all your knights lifelink, and you can pay into him to either give him Vigilance during the day, or Flying during the night. Sir Conrad the Grim hits each opponent for 1 whenever another creature dies. A creature is put in their grave from anywhere other than the field, or leaves the graveyard, and you can pay into him to mill everyone for 1. Thalia's Lancers has First Strike, and when they enter, you can search your library for a legendary card and add it to your hand. Valiant Knight gives your other knights +1/+1, and you can pay into it to give your knights Double Strike for the turn. Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor, gives other players 1/1 survivors equal to the amount of damage she dealt to them, and those survivors can't block and can't attack you or your planeswalkers you control. Also, when she leaves, you gain control of all survivors. Wintermoor Commander has Death Touch, and his toughness is equal to the number of knights you control. Whenever he attacks, another knight you control gains indestructible for the turn. Whew, a lot of knights. Now we'll get into the equipment, starting with Ancestral Blade, which creates a 1/1 soldier that it equips itself to when it enters, giving equipped creature +1/+1. Argentum Armor gives +6/+6 and just destroys a permanent when the equipped creature attacks. Blackblade Reforge gives +1/+1 for each land you control, and Colossus Hammer gives +10/+10 and removes flying. Crystal Slipper is like Swiftfoot Boots Light, that is to say, bad Swiftfoot boots, but nonetheless they give +1/+0 and haste. Embercleave is a beaut, bearing Flash, becoming 1 cheaper for each attacking creature you control, attaching itself to a creature you control when it enters, and giving it +1/+1 and Double Strike and Trample. Godsend, or God's End, gives +3/+3, and when the creature is blocked or blocks, you can exile one of the blocking or blocked creatures. Opponents can't cast cards that share a name with the cards Godsend exiles. Hero's Blade gives +3/+2 and can be attached to a legendary creature when they enter for free. Konda's Banner can only go on legendary creatures, and gives other creatures that share a color with the equipped creature +1/+1, and does the same for any creature that shares a creature type with the equipped creature. Since there are 2 different lines of text, then if it's equipped to Gwyn, then any red knight would get +2/+2 as an example. Plus, it has some pretty art. Mesa the Valiant gives the creature +1/+1 for each charge counter on it, and it gets a charge counter whenever a creature enters under your control. Malefic Scythe enters with a soul counter on it, gives +1/+1 for each soul counter on it, and whenever equipped creature dies, it gets another soul counter. The thing sucks the soul out of its wielder when they die, borrowing them from the afterlife in order to make its next wielder even stronger. Brutal. Mirror Shield gives +0/+2 and hexproof, and whenever a creature with Death Touch blocks or becomes blocked by the creature, you destroy that creature. Shadow Spear, not Mardu Shadow Spear. Swear to God, every Magic Archive I've ever visited tries to give me Mardu Shadow Spear before the Shadow Spear I want, and I know it's doing its job by putting them in alphabetical order, but really, who gives a care about Mardu Shadow Spear? Anyways, Shadow Spear gives +1/+1, Trample, and Lifewink. Lifewink? Oh, Lifewink. And you can pay into it to strip permanents your opponent's control of hexproof and indestructible for the turn. You can pay into this even if it's not equipped, by the way. Steel Claw Lance gives +2/+2, Swiftfoot Boots are a classic and give hexproof and haste, and Sword of the Animist gives +1/+1 on top of letting you search your deck for a basic land whenever the equipped creature attacks. And this concludes the equipment segment. Support is up next, starting with Board the Weatherlight, which lets you grab a historic card, that is, an Artifact Saga or Legendary card, from the top 5 in your library and put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your deck. Day of Destiny gives your legendary creatures +2/+2, which, since it's an enchantment, it really should be called Days of Destiny, but whatever. General's Enforcer isn't a knight, but he does give legendary humans you control indestructible, which we run a lot of those. Also, he can exile a card from a graveyard, and if it was a creature, you get a 1/1 soldier token. Goryo's Vengeance returns a legendary creature from your grave to the battlefield, giving it haste and exiling it at the end of the turn. It also has Splice onto Arcane, which, as you cast an arcane spell, you can attach with Hero's Podium gives each legendary creature you control +1/+1 for each other legendary creature you control. And you can pay X and tap it to grab a legendary creature from the top X cards of your library and add it to your hand, putting the rest on the bottom of your deck. Icon of Ancestry has you choose a creature type when it enters, and it gives creatures of that type +1/+1. You can also pay 3 and tap it to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal a creature of the chosen type, and put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your deck. Joyra's Familiar has Flying, and makes historic spells cost 1 less to cast. Knight's Charge hits each opponent for 1 and gains you 1 life whenever a knight you control attacks, and you can pay into it to sack it and return all knights from your grave to the field. Leon and Shikari lets you equip equipment at an instant speed, which is pretty sick. On Sarah's Wings gives enchanted creature +1/+1, flying, vigilance, and lifelink, and makes it legendary. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth returns all legendary permanents from your grave to the battlefield. The Circle of Loyalty costs 1 less to cast for each knight you control, gives your creatures +1/+1, and whenever you cast a legendary spell, you make a 2/2 with Vigilance. You can also pay and tap it to make the same token. Vanquisher's Banner has you choose a creature type when it enters, giving creatures you control of that type +1/+1, and drawing you a card whenever you cast a creature spell of that type. Utility encompasses all of our removal and mana rocks, among other things. Arcane Signet taps for any of our colors, Burnished Heart can be sacked to grab you 2 basics, Chromatic Lantern can tap for 1 of any color, and lets your lands do the same, and Crackling Doom hits each opponent for 2 and makes them sack a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. Firemind Vessel enters tapped and taps for any 2 different colors. Jaya's Immolating Inferno is an X-cost spell that hits up to 3 targets each for X damage. Merciless Eviction exiles either all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. And Nahiri, Storm of Stone makes equip costs cheaper, gives your creature's first strike on your turn, and can deal damage to a tapped creature equal to the amount of loyalty you pay into the ability. Response to Resurgence is both an instant that hits an attacking or blocking creature for 5, as well as a sorcery that gives creatures you control first strike and vigilance for the turn, adding an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase after the main phase it's cast in. Ruinous Ultimatum destroys all non-land permanents your opponents control for a hefty mana cost. Savai Crystal taps for any of our colors that has Cycling 2. Single Combat has everyone choose 1 creature or planeswalker they control and has them sack the rest, preventing everyone from casting a creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. Finally, Soul Ring's the Classic. Last up are our lands, starting with Barrenmoor that enters tapped, taps for a black and can be cycled for a black. Bloodfell Caves enters tapped and gains you a life. Boros Guildgate enters tapped. Buried Ruin can be tapped and sacked to return an artifact from your grave to your hand. Command Towers, Command Tower. Evolving Wilds can be cracked to grab a basic. Field of Ruin can be sacked to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls. And then everyone grabs a basic land. Godless Shrine enters tapped unless you pay 2 life. Labyrinth of Scophos can be tapped to remove an attacking or blocking creature from combat. Nomad Outpost enters tapped and taps for any of our colors. Orzhov Guildgate enters tapped. Rakdos Guildgate enters tapped. Savai Triome enters tapped, taps for any of our colors and has Cycling 3. Scoured Barrens enters tapped and gains you a life. Temple of Triumph enters tapped and scries 1. Tournament Grounds taps for either a colorless, or for any of our colors but only for knights and equipment spells. And Windscarred Crag enters tapped and gains us a life. We also run 5 mountains, 8 plains, and 6 swamps. And there's the whole deck. I call it Dark Souls because in Dark Souls, Lord Gwyn was the man who reigned over the land during the Age of Fire. It's a pretty aggressive deck, and I'm very happy with its results so far, even if it's not CEDH level. With that, I ask, what do you think? Let us know your thoughts and questions in the comments below. What would you add to the deck if you had an unlimited budget? If you liked this video, please leave a like, and think about subscribing if you want to see more from us in the future. Have a great day, y'all.